On the 1st of July 2025, a telescope in the mountains of Chile caught something moving through the darkness that should not have been there. It was not a planet. It was not a comet born in our solar system. It was something older than the sun itself, something that had been drifting through the black gulf between the stars for longer than human civilization has existed, and it was heading straight toward us. Astronomers gave it a cold, clinical name, 3I Atlas. But behind that name is a story that has quietly split the scientific world in two. A story involving a Harvard professor who dared to ask the unthinkable question, a secret radio search that scanned 74 million signals in the dark, and a countdown that is still ticking as this object races away from Earth, never to return. Stay with us, because what you're about to hear is not fiction. It happened. It is happening. And nobody, not even the world's most respected scientists, can agree on what it actually means. Let us go back to the beginning, to the exact moment this story started. The Atlas survey system, a network of robotic telescopes built specifically to hunt for objects that could threaten Earth, flagged a faint point of light moving in a way that made no sense. Most objects in our solar system move in predictable closed loops, bound forever by the sun's gravity. This one was different. Its path was hyperbolic, an open curve that meant it had never belonged to our solar system at all. It had come from somewhere else, somewhere out there, among the billions of stars scattered across the Milky Way, and it was only passing through, using our sun as little more than a waypoint on a journey that had probably already lasted millions, maybe billions of years. Within hours, more than 30 observatories around the world confirmed the discovery. This was only the third interstellar object ever detected in the history of astronomy, following two previous visitors, one in 2017 and another in 2019. But almost immediately, scientists sensed that this one was different. This one was bigger, stranger, and it was going to get far closer to us than anyone expected. As the weeks passed, the questions only multiplied. Where did this thing come from? How old was it? And most unsettling of all, was it truly just a piece of ancient ice and rock? Or could it be something else entirely? Something built rather than born? Subscribe now, because the deeper we go into this story, the stranger the evidence becomes, and you will not want to miss what came next. What made the early tracking especially remarkable was how much of the object's journey had already happened before anyone on Earth even knew it existed. Once the discovery was confirmed, astronomers went back through archived images from other survey telescopes around the world, searching for faint traces of the object in data that had already been collected but never flagged. They found it. Pre-discovery images stretched the object's known timeline backward by nearly 3 weeks, to the middle of June, quietly present in the frames the whole time, unnoticed, unremarkable, just another point of light among millions, until someone finally knew what they were looking for. There's something almost eerie about that detail. The object had already been watching, or at least already been present in our sky before we ever noticed it was there. By the end of July, the world's most powerful space telescopes had turned their eyes toward the object. Hubble captured haunting images of it, a solid, icy core wrapped in a teardrop-shaped cocoon of dust, streaking silently against a background of frozen stars. Because the object was moving on a one-way trajectory that would never repeat, astronomers understood they had exactly one chance to study it before it vanished into the void forever. There would be no second pass, no return visit in a decade or a century. Whatever secrets it carried, they had to be uncovered now, in this narrow window, before the object slipped past the sun and disappeared back into interstellar space. That pressure, that sense of a closing door, is part of what makes this story so gripping. Somewhere in the scientific community, a quiet urgency took hold. Researchers reportedly canceled other projects. Observation time on some of the most sought-after instruments on Earth and in orbit was reportedly redirected, almost overnight, toward this single object. When an object like this appears, institutions do not usually move that fast. But this time they did. Then came the measurements that truly unsettled the scientific community. Using deep space instruments, researchers estimated the object's nucleus could be anywhere from under a mile wide to nearly 4 miles across, at a range so wide it revealed just how little they actually understood about what they were looking at. Its surface was obscured by a thick veil of dust and gas, a coma that made it almost impossible to pin down its true shape or size with certainty. And then, something happened that made even seasoned scientists pause. As it approached the sun, the object began releasing water vapor into space at a staggering rate, reportedly equivalent to about 70 Olympic swimming pools of water every single day. That alone might not sound alarming. Comets release water vapor when heated. That is expected, ordinary, explainable behavior. But the direction of that release was not ordinary at all. Most of the vapor was not streaming away from the sun, the way physics would predict for a simple ball of ice being heated from one side. Instead, much of it was being pushed toward the sun, against the very forces that should have blown it in the opposite direction. Scientists were reportedly puzzled. Some described it as one of the more unusual outgassing patterns ever recorded on a comet. And then the anomaly grew stranger still. As the object approached its closest point to the Sun in late October, instruments detected something astronomers call an anti-tail, a jet of material streaming in a direction opposite to what a normal cometary tail should ever do. Comet tails, as a rule, point away from the Sun, pushed back by solar radiation and the solar wind. This one, for a period of time, appeared to defy that rule. Researchers scrambled to explain it using known physics, citing the geometry of dust particles and the angle of observation from Earth. Most ultimately concluded it was a rare but natural optical and physical effect. But for a brief window in late 2025, before that explanation solidified, the anomaly was enough to make even cautious scientists use words they rarely use in public. Unusual, unexpected, unlike anything previously observed. It was against this backdrop of genuine scientific uncertainty that one voice grew louder than the rest. Avi Loeb, the former chair of Harvard University's astronomy department and one of the most decorated theoretical physicists alive, had already built a reputation for asking the question most of his colleagues refused to say out loud. Years earlier, he had suggested that the first interstellar visitor, Oumuamua, might not have been a natural object at all, but possibly a piece of alien technology. That claim had made him one of the most controversial figures in modern astronomy, celebrated by some as a bold truth seeker, dismissed by others as a scientist chasing headlines instead of evidence. When 3i Atlas arrived, Loeb turned his full attention toward it. He developed something he called a classification scale, a numbered system running from 0, representing an entirely natural icy body, up to 10, representing confirmed alien technology. Shortly after the object's discovery, he reportedly placed 3i Atlas at a 4 on that scale, a number that signaled genuine, if cautious, uncertainty rather than dismissal. That single number ignited a firestorm. Across social media and cable news, the phrase alien probe began attaching itself to 3i Atlas, spreading faster than any peer-reviewed paper ever could. Loeb, appearing on national television, was pressed directly on the question, and he gave a careful, deliberately restrained answer. He said the object was most likely a natural comet, but that science demanded the alternative be tested rather than dismissed outright. It was a nuanced position, but nuance rarely survives contact with a headline. To millions of people scrolling through their feeds, what they heard was simple and electric. A Harvard professor thinks an alien spacecraft might be flying through our solar system right now. What almost never gets mentioned in the viral clips and the screenshots is just how carefully Loeb had built his framework before 3i Atlas ever arrived. The classification scale was not something improvised in the heat of a headline. It had reportedly been developed and formalized across 2 separate peer-reviewed publications, refined further into a system that could actually evolve as new observational data came in, rather than locking an object into a permanent verdict on day 1. That is a subtle but important distinction, and it is one that almost entirely disappeared once the story reached social media. To the public, the takeaway was binary. A respected scientist said this might be an alien ship. The actual claim, buried underneath that headline, was far more disciplined, more like a probability that could shift in either direction as evidence accumulated, rather than a prediction carved in stone. So how do you actually test a question like that? How do you tell the difference between a comet and a spacecraft from another star? The answer, it turns out, is radio silence, or the lack of it. If an object is artificial, if it carries any kind of active technology on board, there is a reasonable chance it emits some form of electromagnetic signal, whether by design or as a byproduct of internal systems. Natural comets do not do this. They are inert, unpowered, incapable of producing anything resembling a structured radio transmission. And so, in a move that reads like the opening act of a science fiction film, except that it was entirely real, the SETI Institute, the organization whose entire purpose is the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, pointed one of its most sensitive instruments directly at 3i Atlas. The instrument was the Allen Telescope Array, a cluster of radio dishes standing silently in the hills of Northern California, built for exactly this kind of moment. Scientists began their observation less than a day after the object's discovery was announced to the world, a response time so fast it demonstrated just how seriously the possibility was being taken behind closed doors, even by researchers who publicly maintained that a natural explanation was overwhelmingly likely. Over more than 7 hours, the array swept across a wide band of radio frequencies, listening for anything that did not belong. What they found at first was staggering in scale. Nearly 74 million individual narrowband signals were detected within that window. For a brief, almost cinematic moment, imagine being in that control room and watching that number climb. 74 million signals, pulled from empty space, all seemingly clustered around a single ancient object hurtling silently through the dark. But numbers like that rarely mean what they first appear to mean, and the real work was only beginning. One by one, researchers began filtering the data, stripping away anything that could be traced back to human activity. Cell towers, satellites, radar installations, the endless electronic noise of a planet saturated with its own signals. The 74 million shrank and shrank again and shrank further as engineers cross-referenced each candidate signal against the object's precise motion across the sky, checking whether the signal's behavior actually matched something moving at 3I Atlas's specific speed and trajectory rather than something anchored to Earth. Anything that failed that test was discarded. What remained, after all of that filtering, was a final list of roughly 200 candidate signals. 200 out of 74 million. A number small enough to actually study one by one. And this is the moment the story reaches its sharpest edge, the point where the evidence could have gone either way. If even a handful of those 200 signals had ultimately resisted explanation, had refused to match any known source on Earth or in orbit, this would be one of the most significant scientific discoveries in human history. Comment below and tell us what you think that discovery would have meant for humanity, because the researchers themselves later admitted that possibility weighed on them throughout the process. The answer, when it finally came, was both a relief and, for many watching from the outside, a quiet disappointment. Every single one of the remaining candidate signals was ultimately traced back to a source on or near Earth, human-made technology, either on the ground or in orbit around our own planet. Not one signal originated from 3I Atlas itself. The object, according to this exhaustive search, was radio silent. No transmission, no structured pulse, no detectable technology of any kind. The scientists involved were careful and measured in how they described the result, noting that the search demonstrated how capable modern instruments are at detecting even faint signals, and that continuing to search future interstellar visitors for similar signs remained important scientific work, precisely because the day may come when the answer is different. So if it was not a signal, if it was not a transmission, what was 3I Atlas actually telling us? Because, in a sense, it was still speaking, just not in the way the internet wanted it to. It was speaking through chemistry. In the months that followed, using the James Webb Space Telescope's most sensitive spectroscopic instrument, researchers led by a scientist at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center made a discovery that reignited public fascination all over again. They found that the ratio of methane to water within the object's coma was roughly 11 times higher than anything ever measured in any other object within our own solar system. 11 times. A ratio so extreme that it forced scientists to reconsider what kind of environment could have produced it in the first place. The leading explanation pointed toward natural thermal outgassing, chemical processes triggered as ancient ices sublimate under the heat of a star, layer by layer, releasing whatever had been locked inside for eons. But the sheer scale of the anomaly meant that 3I Atlas had formed somewhere fundamentally different from anything we have direct experience with in our own cosmic neighborhood. To understand why that number mattered so much to scientists, you have to understand what methane and water actually reveal about where an object was born. In our own solar system, the balance between these two molecules follows fairly predictable patterns, shaped by how far a given body formed from the sun, how much heat it absorbed in its early life, and how it evolved over billions of years in a relatively well-mapped chemical environment. When a ratio comes back 11 times outside anything ever recorded here, it is not simply a strange number on a spreadsheet. It is a signal that the raw material this object was built from, and the environment it formed within, may bear almost no resemblance to anything in our own cosmic backyard. Some researchers reportedly described the finding as one of the clearest chemical fingerprints yet, that 3I Atlas truly did originate around a different star entirely, light years from anything humanity has ever directly studied up close. Separately, another team using the powerful ALMA array in Chile performed a kind of chemical fingerprinting never before successfully completed on an interstellar object. They measured the ratio between ordinary water and a heavier variant called deuterated water, sometimes referred to as heavy water, within the object's emissions. What they found was, once again, unlike anything catalogued in our own solar system. The implications reached far beyond a single strange comet. They suggested that 3I Atlas may have formed around a star entirely unlike our sun, in a region of the galaxy colder, older, and chemically distinct from the one that gave birth to Earth. And then came perhaps the most staggering figure of all. Based on models built from this data, researchers estimated the object's age at somewhere between 10 and 12 billion years old. Let that number settle for a moment. Our sun is roughly 4.5 billion years old. Earth itself is younger still. This object, this silent traveler now fading into the dark beyond Jupiter, had very likely existed for billions of years before our solar system even began to form. It may be older than most of the stars visible in tonight's sky. It has been drifting through the galaxy since a time before our sun ignited, a wanderer with no home, carrying inside it the chemical memory of a world we will never see, a star that may no longer even exist. As 2026 unfolded, The object continued its long, lonely arc through the solar system, passing close to Mars, sweeping near Jupiter in March, observed the entire way by an extraordinary alliance of spacecraft, nearly every major mission currently operating in our solar system, from Hubble and Webb in Earth orbit to the Perseverance rover on the surface of Mars, to probes orbiting Europa and en route to distant asteroids, all turning their instruments, however briefly, toward this single ancient visitor. It is a strange thing to consider that, for a short window in human history, so much of our collective scientific infrastructure was quietly focused on one object that will never come back. There will be no second observation window, no follow-up mission decades from now. Whatever we have learned, whatever we failed to learn, this is very likely the only chance our civilization will ever have with 3I Atlas specifically. That reality has pushed some scientists to propose something audacious. If we cannot bring the object to us, why not chase it? Researchers have floated the idea of launching a spacecraft on what is known as an Oberth maneuver, using the immense gravity of the sun itself to slingshot a probe at speeds high enough to actually catch up with an interstellar object as it exits the solar system. It is not a new idea. It was first proposed years earlier in response to the very first interstellar visitor under a program known as Project Lyra, but 3I Atlas has given the concept new urgency. Whether such a mission will ever actually launch remains uncertain, tangled in questions of funding, timing, and the sheer difficulty of the engineering involved. But the fact that serious scientists are seriously discussing it tells you something about how significant this object is now understood to be. So where does that leave us? What is 3I Atlas in the end? The overwhelming scientific consensus, backed by radio silence across 74 million filtered signals, by chemistry, by trajectory, by every instrument turned toward it, is that this is a natural object. An ancient wandering comet older than our sun, carrying within it fragments of a star system that likely no longer exists, drifting silently through the galaxy for billions of years before a brief and fleeting encounter with us. There was no final transmission. There was no warning message encoded in radio waves. What there was, instead, was something arguably more profound. A piece of the deep, deep past, older than Earth itself, passing silently through our sky, studied for a few short months by a civilization that had only just learned how to look for it. And yet, even now, even with the data in, even with the consensus reached, a quiet unease lingers in certain corners of the scientific community. Avi Loeb has stated publicly that he still declines to lower his classification score until further data, gathered during the object's closest approach, is fully released and independently analyzed. That data, some of it, may still be under review even now. The anti-tail anomaly, though largely explained, was never fully resolved to the satisfaction of every researcher who examined it. And the sheer scale of the chemical anomalies, that 11 times methane ratio, that unprecedented heavy water signature, continues to be studied, argued over, and modeled in papers that are still being written as you listen to this. 3I Atlas is gone now, or nearly gone, a fading point of light retreating back into the same interstellar darkness it emerged from, carrying its billions of years of secrets with it, forever out of reach. We may never build a spacecraft fast enough to catch it. We may never know with absolute, unshakable certainty what it truly was. What we do know is this: it came from somewhere else. It passed through everything we call home, and it left behind a question that no filtering algorithm, no radio telescope, and no Harvard professor has been able to fully answer. Somewhere out there, in the vast cold distances between the stars, there may be another one coming. And next time, we may be watching even more closely than before. If you found this story as unsettling and as fascinating as we did, make sure you are subscribed, because the search for what else might be out there has only just begun.